Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the panel on large-scale AI as a public infrastructure here at AI House Davos that's taking place during the World Economic Forum 2026. It is a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Sunny Grineveld. I will be moderating this panel and look very much forward to diving into this discussion with you. A heads up, we are going to do a Q&A at the end of this session, so if you have questions, please do keep those front and center so you can jump in at the end. And now, let me introduce you to our four wonderful panelists, accomplished AI experts. First here, right next to me, Professor Petri Myllymäki, a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of Helsinki, who also serves as a board member of CSC, the IT Center for Science, which hosts the Lumi AI Factory. Who has heard of Lumi before in here? Few single hands, don't be shy. Lumi, in case for those who are not quite sure what we're talking about, it's a pan-European pre-exascale supercomputer that is located in CSC's data center in Kajaani, Finland. We're going to hear a little bit more about that later. Then, next to him, Professor Andreas Krause. This is home turf for you. He's a professor of computer science at ETH Zurich, where he leads the Learning and Adaptive Systems Group. He is also the chair of the ETH AI Center and co-founded the ETH spin-off Lattice AI Flow, or Lattice Flow. And then we have Audrey Herblin Stop, Senior Vice President, Global Public Affairs and Communications at Mistral, fast-growing French AI company that develops powerful large language models, both proprietary and open. And as of recent, they have also started to build infrastructure, which is relevant for this panel, as that is what we're focusing on for itself and also for customers, all based on European soil. Last but not least, we're very excited to have Professor Peter Sarlen with us. He's the CEO and co-founder of Silo AI, Europe's largest private AI lab. In 2024, Silo AI was acquired by AMD, marking it Europe's largest AI acquisition to date. Congratulations on that one. He also serves as a professor of practice at Aalto University in Helsinki, specializing in machine learning and AI. So as you see, we have four incredible AI experts with us, some of them deeply ingrained in AI infrastructure, and others spending years, if not decades, studying it. And we're so excited to be able to learn from you in the next 50 minutes or so. So to start us off, let me just say a few words on today's topic, large-scale AI as a public infrastructure, and why it matters. I'm sure you've been now to many panels, hopping here and there, learning about different things. And so let me try to anchor and center this very conversation for you. I think we are entering a phase where AI is no longer best understood as a collection of technology products or applications, even though many of us do have our own personal applications that we use, or products that we use on a day-to-day basis. But it's increasingly, I think, better understood as infrastructure because it's capital intensive, it's systemic, increasingly, it's foundational to many sectors, if not all, and essential for future-proof economy and society. Now, if we accept this understanding, this assessment, then it inevitably raises a fundamental question, which is, how should we govern large-scale AI? And who should have access to it? Is it a public good, like the road right out here? Or is it a private good? Is it exclusive or not, and to whom? The good news is that we are still at the beginning. We still have choices to make. And that is why these discussions right now are so key. For example, we can make a choice of, do we see AI being governed in the future increasingly like the internet or like a power grid? I hope you will form your own opinions and that we can provide some learning opportunity and some insights. And with that, let's take it away. I'm going to start right here next to me with you, Professor Myllymäki. You're involved with CSC, the IT Centre for Science in Finland, and in many ways host a supercomputer even before one would say AI became a mainstream subject. When was a moment for you when you really realized AI is more than just a collection of technology products or more than just yet another emerging technology and rather an infrastructure? What was that moment, that anecdote, that decision that triggered that for you?
Okay, thank you. I'm very happy to be here today. So maybe since I'm maybe the eldest, or at least I have been working in AI on 5 different decades, not 50 years, but on 5 different decades. So I go back in time. I don't remember the exact year, but many of you may remember that Google search when it emerged. That was the AI of that time. And when it emerged, I remember that BMW Germany tried to do something, some doping type of a thing, so that they would be kind of emerging in the search results against the rules of this product. And they were banned from the internet for a week. And then I realized what type of power a digital platform can host. I mean, like, internet we already had, and it was open, and everybody could access internet or set up something, a service or something on the internet. So it was basically open. But in particular, in the beginning, for many people, Google search was equal to the internet. It was the gateway to the internet. People didn't necessarily even understand the difference of Google search and the internet. So this much power. So we are now thinking, I'm now a little bit worried that we are creating new technology. So is it going to be like the internet that is open? It's hardware, software, tools and technologies that everybody can use. Or are we building a gateway, a gatekeeper who will control all this?
A question we will explore. I'm just going to pass it on to you, Professor Krause. When did it hit for you? When was there a moment, a switch in your thinking to be like, wait a minute, this is actually more infrastructure than anything else?
So I've been in machine learning and AI for maybe not quite as long, but still also for the last 20 years. Of course, the field has viewed AI as associated with a range of different technologies. Certainly, kind of the importance of large data sets and big data, right? So that has, for many years, been an important topic. I think when you talk about AI today, you talk about generative AI, agentic systems, and so on. I think that's also maybe the premise that we want to focus a bit on. And so in this case, what I think has certainly when ChatGPT came online, the rapid adoption of the technology, as the extent it has been put in the spotlight, I think has shown that it's not just big data, right, but really massive compute that goes into it. And of course, not just training these models, but of course, serving these models, performing inference with them. And so that means now we really talk about large-scale compute infrastructures, like supercomputers matter, right, and these kind of things. Maybe also contextualizing a little bit. So I'm involved in the Swiss AI initiative that released the Apertus family of large language models, entirely open models, fully transparent, jointly developed by ETH, EPFL, many other partners. And that, I think, contextualizes some of the experience in what it takes to kind of train these models and really deploy them at scale.
Maybe for those who's already heard of Apertus in here? This is an international audience, and clearly you are on the rise with it. From an infrastructure perspective, where does Apertus sit?
So it's been trained entirely in Scratch on the Swiss Supercomputing Center, CSCS, in Lugano. And yeah, so that basically is where the model was trained. So.
Interesting. Audrey, so Mistral was founded in 2023. That's also when you released your first model. In many ways, I would say, as someone who's not per se exclusively active in this field, but has I would say, to some degree, a good layman's understanding of it. I would consider it a European alternative to ChatGPT. I hope I'm not insulting. Do you think large-scale AI behaves? So when did that switch for you? Because I learned that not too long ago, Mistral has decided to build its own infrastructure on European soil. So clearly there must have been at a global level, at CEO level, at founder level, a switch in understanding. You didn't do this in 2023, but now you have come along and you've decided as a company to go forward in this space. Why?
So I'll come back to the ChatGPT comparison. I think when you think about AI, the conversational assistant is the top of the iceberg. But actually, there's so many things that AI can do, and you actually cannot see as an end consumer. And we believe at Mistral that that's where we have the most strong opportunities to actually help enterprise and public sector to transform the way they work, what they can produce. We can transform manufacturing. So what we're doing, I mean, ChatGPT is the application layer, but if you go back to the model layer, you have so many opportunities, especially if, like us, you think about open source, as I think open source will have a key role in this debate about making it a public good, but also if you customize everything. And I think that's why I would differentiate from ChatGPT, because what we actually do is very different. Is how do we make something that is really custom for our enterprise and partners' problem and to solve their problems. To go back to the infrastructure question, indeed, for us, at some point when the geopolitical situation started to escalate a bit and we were deciding to actually create our own infrastructure.
Was there a specific moment in the geopolitical developments? I mean, there have been many recently.
With the export control questions on chips. And Europe was not the main target of those debates, but indeed it was impacting Europe. And it was a time where we realized that actually something that was really bigger than us, not actually focusing on us, could actually stop our ability to run our model and to serve our customers. And that's why at some point we really decided to think about our independence as something that should go through the entire value chain of AI. This is not an easy move for a one-year-old company to go into infrastructure, especially in Europe. But indeed, at some point, it felt like if we want to build a credible, independent AI solution in Europe, we should also invest in infrastructure.
Peter, you have built Silo AI. You're still running it as a CEO. You've been now through the acquisition. You're now part of AMD. Hardware is something that is very key to AMD's existence. How do you see it? What was for you a moment where perception shifted? Was it this acquisition moment? Have you been thinking about AI as infrastructure for way longer than that? Where did that moment fall for you? And what was the anecdote?
Yeah, I mean, I've been obviously, like Andreas and Petri alluded to, they've been in AI probably longer than me. I've been during 3 decades. Maybe that sounds old enough, but you know, seen a number of different waves and how AI has sort of interplayed in various ways in our society. And that's sort of the backward-looking view. Then, of course, we have the forward-looking view, and then we have the perspective that we take on today and today's wave, which is heavily sort of focusing on LLMs, which is not the only thing that the world is doing today either. So I'd like to take a bit of a broader perspective to what is actually AI and what is actually infrastructure in the context of AI. And I don't want to say I'm sort of. And now, you know, connecting point to Lumi, obviously powered by AMD Compute, and we built our models on Lumi before being acquired. And I blushed when you did the introduction because, you know, at the time we were the largest at the time Silo was the largest acquisition. Today, I cheer and back and support AI companies across the world, including European. But when it comes to really the sort of question of AI as an infrastructure and public, I don't think it's only public, it's public-private, and it's public and private. Eventually, AI in itself is not a product. Models on their own are not creating value to anyone. Yeah. They do that as part of products when they get embedded and integrated and value gets distributed to end users. And that happens in assistants and chatbots or in lawnmowers or vacuum cleaners or whatever the application in different ways. So, I think we need to be very specific when we think about AI as infrastructure. Chatbots and assistants are, one type of infrastructure. And then obviously we will have autonomous vehicles that are today powered by the same transformers, or we have, say, games engines that are powered by the same transformers. Life science is powered by the same transformers. And that creates a different type of infrastructure. And then, of course, from a public perspective, it's a bit of a different dimension.
Well, thank you for that. Please.
Yeah, I mean,
a follow-up. Mentioned.
Since my original kind of this revelation moment was supposed to be AlphaFold. And that's when now that Peter was talking about this kind of, and everybody was talking that AI is just not just only LLMs. Like I think it kind of made me understand this AlphaFold moment when people seem to think that, okay, that's yet another US company that did something great and Europe did nothing. Actually, the data set was collected over decades of public work. It was created by EMBL, a public organization. EMBL colleagues, some say that the work effort was worth 50 billion euros, and it was just there. Maybe we should have realized ourselves that, we have now this technology, we can do this. Luckily, DeepMind, owned by Google or Alphabet, they are releasing the code as open source, which is great. One lesson learned, AI is not a race. I don't care who did this. I'm just happy that somebody did. And next time, perhaps it's all public, or maybe it's, again, public-private collaboration. I have heard DeepMind people say that there are 2 million projects ongoing in the world that are using this AlphaFold open source software, developing new vaccines, microplastic-eating bacteria, and 2 million other things. So I think this is a much bigger thing that, with all respect to LLMs, these kind of chatbots are very interesting and useful, but they are just one thing, as was said already.
Yeah, so science is absolutely being transformed through AI. A lot of classical computational science is really revolutionized through generative models. We think about weather models, climate models, and so on. This is absolutely transformative, right? And it's also for really staying at the forefront of science. It's absolutely essential that infrastructure exists, such as CSCS, that can really do work and foundation models for this, right? So the role of infrastructure depends, of course, very much on applications, right? So now this is kind of the scientific setting, right? But I think it really needs to be contextualized depending on the setting.
And so let's, the three of you have sort of shifted gears into the next sort of topic that I think is really key to this, is who should govern these large-scale AI infrastructures? So is it the private? When is it the private sector? And Audrey, sort of looking at you here. Yeah. When is it nation states? When is it public-private partnerships? And when should it maybe be international coalitions? I think you were also involved in a UN effort in this regard, which we might get to later. So sort of when does which actor take the lead? Which context deserves maybe more of a nation-state actor to step in? We're having some panels here at the AI House on digital sovereignty, for example, and I'm sure they're exploring some aspect of that as well. And when should it maybe be more private sector? And since you are building right now, give us your thoughts on the private sector view.
So I'm not a scientist, so I'm very comfortable talking for them, but I would take the example of my CEO, Arthur Mensch. And Arthur was a strong scientist, academic background in France. And at some point, he has two options, going to the CNRS, the very strong research institute in France, or going to DeepMind. And at this moment, when you ask him, he will tell you, to do what I needed to do, I would get more money and more collaborative approach in DeepMind than what I would have had at CNRS. And the reality of this technology is that it's so expensive that indeed, especially in Europe where R&D investment are lower than elsewhere in the world, indeed, with the private sector, you have probably greater opportunity to advance the science. That being said, something that is really important when you think this way and you invest in private development of such a transformative technology is to make sure that it's not captured into the end of a few. And that was really the reason why the company was founded by people who were really well at DeepMind and Meta. It was like, we can't have no alternative to a technology that at the time was in the end of very few number of company, mainly in the US. Now we can see that China is growing, but so there was this idea that it should be decentralized and it should be grounded on open source, because the moment you release on open source, it means that you give it to the community and then it can live, even if the company is failing, even if, and it means that everybody can take it, can share it, can work on it. And again, coming from a company that was founded by scientists, I think this point is really important in this revolution that is AI, is that what matters for them is the fact that we can advance science. And they would be pleased to work with, we are working with research institutes, we are doing private-public sectors partnership, even if France is not the best place to do that. But, the spirit of scientists is how can I make science be better and move forward? And I think that should be the leitmotif, how we build a technology that is decentralized, open, and can benefit everybody.
Is that not counter to some of the private sector actors?
Not everybody has chosen open source.
So, so in terms of, maybe just the one follow-up, so in terms of just, give me a sense of, as you're building this, lead times, infrastructure that ages, AI obviously has a pace that is quite, it feels like a GPU comes out and then, pretty soon, a few years later, the next version can do something completely different. Space requirements, the racks, everything suddenly needs to be replaced. If we are to believe on some of the outlook that's being published these days by leading players. How do you deal with that? That's different than infrastructure, which, like the street down there, which you update
I think
every few decades, and that's in Swiss terms.
It's obviously a challenge, but also people need to remind themselves that it's not just about having frontier LLMs are important, but it's not just about frontier LLMs. And obviously, if you want to build the largest general purpose AI models, you would want to get the latest generation of chips. But actually, you could build smaller models. You could build very specialized models. And for that, you do not need this level of technology. And so it's important when you, we bought chips, and so we know the cost of it. So the question is, okay, I will invest in my GB300 to train my big model. What will I do with it when it will be less performant compared to new generation, but it will still work? Maybe I can use that to train smaller model. Maybe I can also use it for my customers to co-train other model. Maybe one day I can use it for inference. So this thinking about what do you do with those chips and those infrastructure in the long term is very important, especially if you care about the sustainability aspect of AI. I know it's something that is less in people's minds recently, but that's something that is very important as well. How do we make sure that when we build infrastructure, we take into consideration the carbon footprint of it? When we chose to put our data center in France, obviously nuclear energy and making sure that we had a low carbon footprint was really, really important compared to what's happening in the US, for example.
Yeah, maybe, I mean, AI is often compared to the internet, and I think like a good comparison is that, as I referred to the early days of the internet and the Google search, is that what we can do with the internet is not just one thing like LLMs, and it's not just search. It's a million different things. People can use it for searching information. Companies can set up products and services, and all this. I'm hoping that AI will become this type of an infrastructure where internet is based on open source, like you know, Linux, Apache, MySQL, Python, all these tools, and it's a messy network of hardware, software, protocol standards. Isn't it remarkable, actually, that it works? But we managed to do it once, so could we do it now with AI so that internet is the best money-making machine we have? So I'm not kind of against commercialization of ideas, but it's like if we could build this kind of a layer where we have these open tools, and then everybody can do whatever they do. If you are a car company, you do better cars and better driving systems, autonomous car systems. If you are a vacuum cleaner product, then you do that, and it's always a different layer.
And who governs that layer in your mind? Who's accountable to some degree, or is it completely decentralized?
Who governs open source? That's a little bit tricky. I mean, like, but isn't it remarkable that it works in the first place? And internet is a pretty remarkable thing, and it's not governed by, kind of officially there are these organizations, but it's not owned by any country or any company, and that's good. Imagine it could have been different. We could be working with Microsoft Internet and IBM Internet or something, and I don't think anybody would be happy. So can we now learn something and try to do something similar with AI?
Try to do it even better.
Yes.
Peter, you've been wanting to jump in. Go for it.
I actually wanted to jump in on what Audrey said earlier, but I think, it usually gets difficult to talk about who governs when we talk about AI, because we don't have a definition of AI, right? So, if you just, and we could talk more about this, so I'll keep it brief, but if you just look at the EU AI Act, it's actually pretty clear until we get to GPAI. And then we don't really have a definition of general purpose AI. But the rest is application specific with risk categories, and that's pretty clear, right? So, eventually we need to be specific. When we talk about infrastructure, it could be compute and chips, it could be models, it could be data, it could be the specific applications or the application layer. And those all need to be sort of governed in...
Do you have a specific view on any of those that you've just, those examples, in terms of, let's say, compute and chips, or do you have any hunch that you want to share with us?
Well, I do, and now I'm actually getting to what I wanted to say. So I think as we have, I think, 3 panelists that are sitting in Europe. No, sorry, 4. I think the reality is that we're running a risk of having all these great researchers and research projects, but Europe not necessarily always being successful in actually commercializing that. And that's where I think the private sector actually plays a key role in many of these application areas. And I think the reality is that in most of them, eventually it is a product development initiative that's going to be costly. We need bold investments. Eventually you need to go after a large revenue opportunity. And in most, like if you look backward, in most examples historically, that's been companies. So I do believe that in most examples, eventually, we need to ensure that there are structures in place that allows companies to innovate and motivates them to put in the bold investments so that they eventually can start to distribute value with AI models.
Andreas, you were looking to get into it.
So maybe one in terms of governance of collaborative efforts around building open source AI, like Pertus and other efforts happening across Europe. I think that's the dire need of really getting to the bottom and trying to work out what that right model is. We have great examples like the Linux Foundation, the Wikimedia Foundation for Wikipedia also. That needs to be rethought in the age of AI, that we don't all reinvent the wheels. I think these conversations need to take place. We've been organizing a model builder summit, trying to bring in some of the relevant initiatives across the world together. There's a second iteration happening pretty soon. But I think these types of conversations really need to take place to move this forward.
So do you think then that AI infrastructure should be considered a public good at some level? And a public good being non-exclusive, non-rivalry. So every, my use of it does not reduce someone else's use of it. Everybody gets, the society, the public gets access to it. Should anyone be able to have as much compute as they want, they need? Sort of how would you see it? I mean, is it ultimately supposed to be a public good?
I think, again, one has to be a bit more differentiated and talk about what AI really means in terms of specific use cases for what purpose and so on, right? And so also, comparing to other infrastructures like energy, we pay for use of energy, right? So even though it is maybe public,
should it be closer then to the internet or to power grid?
I think it has aspects of both, clearly, right? So in terms of capital intensity, it starts to look more like the energy sector also, right? But
so I like the idea that, like I was talking about the internet, that I can set up a server and put it on the internet and nobody is governing it and I don't need to ask some company that can I do this. There are examples, and if I can learn myself how to use Apache and Linux, then I can do this. I would like to have something like this with AI, that it's public in that sense. I have nothing against the best ideas and the bigger investments probably come from the private sector, but maybe a kind of prediction and a word of warning where I think we may be going, because these big tech players, US players, they are not making any money. They are just spending huge amounts of money because the game narrative is that when they just use more and more money and energy and carbon dioxide, then the emerging models will be better and better. I think we are seeing the end of this, because exponential growth means that it stops at some point anyway. But now, Sam Altman last week said that they are now piloting ads in their services, and this starts to sound bad to me, because next step, they are also talking about AI agents a lot, and I was wondering, what are you talking about? We already have, old times, a spam filter is an AI agent, so make them work first and then talk about some new AI agents. But I realized that what they are probably trying to do is to become this gatekeeper and build a kind of a layer between us and the AIs. And then you give them tasks like, I want to buy a car, I want to go on a holiday, and then the AI gives me personalized feedback that this is the car you want. If they can manage to do this, they can put any price tag there, and car manufacturers are happily paying. But this would be awful, because then this is much, much worse than the Google search, which is being manipulated by the advertisers. They basically admit it themselves, but this is much, much worse. So when we realize that, okay, these conversational agents that can maybe, if you are stupid enough to give them your credit card, they can actually do things, but maybe this is not the future we want to go to. And by the end of the day, these are not giving us better products and services, not better healthcare, not better energy networks, not better transportation, not better cars. This is a different story, and kind of, I think, as you said, this LLMs, and the discussion is talking about the tip of the iceberg, and then there's this huge iceberg underneath.
Peter.
Not sure I want to comment on all of those things, but I think maybe that's a category for the EU AI Act to come up with eventually and be concrete about what are we actually regulating there. But then about I truly see and believe that there is sort of at the moment an uncapped demand for compute. And I think that is real. And I think actually it's real for reasons that we agree on, which are not only LLMs, but are all of the other opportunities out there. So there's just, at the moment, there's such a tremendous opportunity in AI, not only LLMs, but AI happening, especially with foundation models and transformers across many different industries. And you asked me to be concrete earlier in terms of public infrastructure. Yes, I do believe that open source plays a key role. And I think it's worth noting that closed and open models have very different dynamics when it eventually comes to how they create value in society. And open source is not necessarily equally good for everyone in this world. Because, here we have two panelists from Finland. It's not necessarily obvious that every open source initiative focuses on the Finnish language, given its size, and with many others. I think it's crucial that there are open source initiatives that are sort of building the backbone so that companies, organizations, individuals in those regions can tap into models and eventually build services on top of them.
Maybe on that, I think when you ask, can we make that a public good? I think we need to talk about the language question, because without talking about the language diversity in LLMs, we're missing a very big part of the question in the debate to make sure that it actually is accessible to everybody. And it's going to be worse than what we have known with the early days of the internet. Like, literally, we are facing a situation where small languages, and I consider French as a small one, could literally disappear. French is 4% of the internet. Only 4%. So what we are talking is really how the US English will become dominant. And that's very important in the way we need to develop models that could benefit everybody, is how can we make sure that we are building sufficiently big enough data sets in various languages to make sure that those models can work for everybody.
So if I follow your logic, does that then also mean that every country at this point should also invest in its own infrastructure, should also invest in its own
data,
data and compute?
So if we consider language data as an infrastructure, indeed, we need to make sure that it's widely accessible to train model, to make sure that we can offer this diversity in what we're producing and that people will actually use it.
Do you think that then also every country should be thinking about, well, Switzerland has this, I think, the second highest density on data centers. So we are right now in quite a high, densely populated compute area. But does that mean then also for every country to really think about that infrastructure piece in terms of, or is that then a more distributed one? So can the sort of
takes this one?
Yes, Andreas, you're about to jump in.
So just echoing the point on the importance of language diversity, right, and low resource languages, right? Talking about Switzerland, right, with 4 official languages, right? Romansh being one of them, right, and that always has been a major emphasis, right, in Apertus, and how do you ensure that these models work well? So I think that's sort of just echoing the importance of that piece. In terms of capabilities, I think again there's a range of different capabilities for different use cases and so on. Again, it's kind of hard to overgeneralize. Certainly, also even just speaking about, say, research in AI, pushing forward the frontier of technology, shaping AI that it actually really becomes a trustworthy technology, is a large-scale computational endeavor. One requires resources like large-scale compute clusters in order to be able to even test ideas at scale. So right now, transformers, LLMs, diffusion models, and so on, right, are the thing. AI has gone through waves of different technologies over the years. I've certainly been long enough in the field to have witnessed a couple of those. We'll see where the technology is going, right? But to push the boundary, that does require infrastructure, even to just kind of keep playing a role in shaping this technology.
And this should be a public effort.
That absolutely should be a public effort.
And do you think that the decision makers in charge, probably some of them walking the streets over here, are aware of of how important these public investments are? Are these being made? Is that what you're seeing?
I think that's the importance of raising awareness of that. So, and I think it is, the public really has very high stakes on this. It's also important to think about the right public-private partnerships to move forward, and to also think about broader international collaboration, compute consortia, right? So, it's, and so to rethink about the role of those in large-scale AI R&D efforts.
You are also involved in some of these private-public.
Kind of, and also my understanding is that if people are wondering, like, you don't need to have one model for each language in the world. One model can govern like all European languages, and if we can pool our resources together, then we can do this. So at the moment, Peter knows this very well. I mean, you are involved in this Open Euro LLM, which is one open source, all European languages, big project. Apertus is another one. I was in a meeting. There was even US ones. Olmo is run by Allen Institute. They were all talking about the same things. Obviously, they were just duplicating the efforts, and people were trying to desperately to say that could we? I mean, like in the early days of Linux, I mean, like it could have dispersed, and there could have been several different systems that don't talk to each other. But luckily, maybe we need kind of the modern Linus Torvalds of AI that kind of keeps all this governed. But like. My understanding is this, and then regarding the computing capabilities, Peter was referring to this, that if we stop worrying about like this, that we need to build this kind of superhuman AI that will solve all the problems in the world. I don't think this will happen. So, but like why we need more computing, more compute is that we need to solve, I mean, not only AlphaFold, it solves one scientific problem. We need to solve 10,000, 100,000 similar problems. And that's why we need all this compute, not because we want to build one gigantic European LLM that competes with the American ones. That's maybe we need to do that too, but that's not the main thing. And finally, Andreas and I were in the UN advisory body of the Secretary General, and there I learned a few things like everybody says like, yes, AI needs to respect human rights. There I learned that access to culture is a human right. It's one number there, it's access to culture. This means also language. And they are intimately intertwined. And I'm a little bit worried that because language is one thing, but then if one country builds the AIs that we use, I'm now talking about the LLMs mostly, then the value system that they reflect does not fit all the countries in the world, not all Western countries. So this is my worry too.
And with that, I would say we are ready to open for audience questions. We have a microphone somewhere, as you see, and I leave the choice to you. I think you're just around one or two questions over there, and I suggest we start with the gentleman. Please.
Thanks. Pete Soderling from Zero Prime Ventures. Just to distinguish between the two pieces, let's say that we have open source bits at the model layer, and we have the compute structure, which is a separate piece. Let's say the bits were open source, but the public or the government sort of owned the compute. Would the panelists be comfortable with the government having access to all the data of its private citizens through that effort?
I can start too. I think there's different categories when you build a model, and obviously the idea. And again, I'm not a scientist, so Peter will correct me later, but the idea of training a model is compressing knowledge. And we don't need private data for that. We don't need personal data in the sense of the GDPR for that. And indeed, we prefer not to have. So indeed, when you build infrastructure, what you want is to provide the trust to the person you are giving this infrastructure, at least that's the way we see it, to ensure that when they train a model on their data, it's there and you can't see it. And it was our promise at Mistral initially to say, you can actually deploy on-premise, because then you give this trust to your customers and partners. So indeed, it raises question if at some point some people have access to everything, it creates a big question. But that being said, I do not think that every people on Earth are aware that what they put in conversational assistant can be used and seen by the companies, the private company that are running the models.
As was asked, let me then confirm that. No, I mean, but I would really agree. I mean, this is again coming back to the point where we need to be specific. When we say we're building AI, what are we actually building? Like, are we building a representation of our language so that we can build a chat assistant? Or are we building world models? Or are we building vacuum cleaners? It's you know, and in most cases, we don't need to have access to personal data. Ideally, we would not have access to personal data. And I would also, I mean, even though I kind of agree with or not kind of, I agree with Petri's example of the value of data assets for protein folding, for instance. But most data assets are not valuable at all. I mean, they're not useful for AI. They're not used for AI. So like having just a pool of data in itself isn't necessarily at all useful. The question is, what do you want to eventually do with that? How do you want to create value to an end user? How do you want to distribute that value with a specific model? And then you need to be very specific in terms of what are the data assets you need for that task.
Other questions? I'd say we have two questions next to each other. So the lady first, and then you, sir.
Thank you. Mariana Prifti from the European AI Forum. My question builds on a point that Petter made before on the difficulty and complexity of defining what AI is actually. So indeed, AI is not just about scientific trends, but it's more about philosophy, and lately a lot about politics. And that reminded me of a talk by Rich Sutton, the father of reinforcement learning, who said that today AI politics is paralleled with the politics of humanity. And he gave a piece of advice that stayed with me in saying that we should seek, looking forward, to achieve decentralized cooperation over centralized control. Now, my question is, do you agree with that? And if this is the case, if large-scale AI is treated as a public infrastructure, how do you design so cooperation stays decentralized rather than drifting into a few actors that are setting the rules, the access, or even the pace? Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I'm not sure I have an answer to the question, but I think the way you set up the question is the important part of ensuring that we get to the right discussion. And we've been going around the question of what is actually AI. And the reality for those that have been in this field for the past few decades, the reality is that machine learning today is A to B mappings in the same way as it's been A to B mappings for the past many decades. We obviously do it with new types of neural networks and new types of architectures that can do more advanced capabilities. I wouldn't say we're on a path to superintelligence either, but I do think these models are bringing horizontal capabilities. That's obviously a little bit different. But it's still basically an A to B mapping, learning sort of, to predict tokens or something else. And then I think to all of these governance questions, they actually usually are quite specific to the application rather than to AI. And it's like we've always governed or regulated different types of tools, different types of applications, and I think we should continue to do that. AI becomes an embedded part of those, be it a car or a chatbot, they should be regulated and governed in different ways. And then obviously how to collaborate, centralized, decentralized, and so forth. I think it's very difficult to generalize and say that you should do it in the same way when you're doing self-driving or when you're doing an assistant.
Maybe.
We're a little
No,
tight on
just
time, but
very briefly to add on that, I think indeed, I mean, we have always asked for decentralization and push the idea that this technology should be decentralized. We really, I mean, open source is a good way to make it decentralized. The other way to make it very decentralized is to making sure that it's not a monopoly or duopoly, and ensuring that we can have multiple players in this field. The problem with this part is that the cost of this technology is so high that it reduces the number of players. So that's where we need to find a way to actually have what we call the infrastructure, compute, data, talents, honestly, they are also expensive, making sure that these assets that you need can also at some point become more accessible for smaller players.
Yeah, I just want to actually say same thing, right? So I think for decentralization, it's essential to have alternatives, right? To kind of really explore parallel options, right? And so also in terms of kind of this infrastructure question, of course, it needs to be a basis to be able to train these models, deploy them, test them, and so on, right? That doesn't mean that there's only going to be one model that runs on them. Also, I think we talked about various different use cases, specialized to different applications, and so on. It needs to be this right ecosystem to foster innovation, right? And kind of build hopefully on open models, right? But absolutely, there needs to be a diversity of systems emerging from that.
Sir,
Yes, thank you.
you're going to have the last question because we are coming up on 2:10, but please.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Stauffacher from ICT for Peace Foundation. And if we talk about public infrastructure, of course, we also have to talk about sustainability. And I think you, Audrey, spoke briefly about energy consumption and nuclear power, and you from the CO2. And so the energy question is one. But I have another one, is with regard to the minerals, the strategic minerals that we need, not only for batteries and whatnot, but also for these chips and whatnot. So we know that most of these minerals are in lands that belong to indigenous peoples. And we're seeing now a rush towards the exploitation of these minerals. I think my question to you, are you thinking about this, or should we have another panel next year about this?
I think it's a good segue to the answer of the panel. No, just a point of that. We conducted the life cycle analysis of our model. We took, at the time, the biggest and the smallest one. We were a one-year-old company at the time, so it was a very strong commitment from us. We did it with Carbon 4, which is Jean Covicier's company, and the French Sustainability Agency. And we didn't know really what we would find, but the idea for us was to at least build a credible methodology. And I think the first step in this question, and so we did from minerals, water consumption, carbon footprint, we did the entire life cycle. The reality is that what we need today to discuss this is to get a standardization of the way to do it, to make sure that every stakeholder speaks the same language. And that's the problem we're facing today, is that nobody knows anything. And in our process to conduct it, we face the lack of transparency of our providers, for example. So our call for that is really to have this debate next year. In the meantime, if we can build on standards, and then we can talk about it with something that would be grounded on the reality.
Good. We are out of time almost. I just want to give one quick round closing question. Do please keep it brief. I also know that there are still questions unanswered in the audience, and I'm sorry about not having more time for you. Some of the panelists will be available for questions in the networking lounge later down the line, so you will still have an opportunity to hopefully get your question in. But if that, just want to close up and ask you for the next 1 to 2 years, what needs to happen, or what do you think will happen? So give us a prediction, something that we can use to come back to next year when we hopefully meet again, and maybe can give more focus to some of the questions that have been asked, particularly the energy and minerals question, which certainly is a key one. So, but please.
Yeah, I try to be optimistic. As I mentioned, we were in Andreas with this UN body, and we published our final report a year ago, and we had 7 recommendations. 2 of them are already implemented or being implemented, and I have high hopes. So the first one was that UN is setting up an AI panel, like we have an IPCC for climate change. There's going to be an AI scientific panel that will kind of maybe it's a kind of source of impartial information, and it will be governed by scientists. So this may play a big role. And the second one is the global, now I forgot it. It's like a kind of how can we divide, share resources that some of the countries have all the resources and some countries have none. So just a final piece of information from this UN group was that there are a lot of global initiatives that try to do kind of make sure that we are producing good for the humankind. There's the AI for Good, Hiroshima process, global partnership on AI, and AI impact summits that started from Bletchley, Paris, now India, all this. But the UN Secretariat made an analysis that out of the 200 member states of the UN, 7 are in all of these, 119 are in none of these. So clearly, I mean, like if we need to build a lot of different regulation systems and certificates and protocols for different use cases, as was mentioned, but we need to be more inclusive and take the whole world in. Otherwise, we are making the AI divide that we have even bigger, the digital divide, even bigger AI divide.
Predictions for the next 2 years, takeaways? Quick one.
I agree with that, but I think I very much hope that over the next 2 years there'll be significant progress in the right partnerships, public-private, but also international for these transparent and large-scale open AI efforts.
Really briefly, I hope that there will be a greater adoption of the technology by government and public sector in general, because then it would force to invest more in the data, in the language diversity, in the infrastructure, because if not, it would not create trust with their citizens. So I think, yeah, adoption by public sector, leading by example, would be something that would change a bit the way it would be done.
The way to go. Well, this is the right audience for that wish. I hope they're listening. Please, Peter.
So this is obviously a very broad question. What will happen in the next 2 years? But to first briefly touch upon the energy question, I think that's an important question. AMD has been delivering on its promises in terms of energy efficiency. I think there is innovation happening in the field, and everyone understands that it's a serious concern. So I believe that will continue, and we will continue to create value in these different fields or applications, and rather than looking at performance per dollar, thinking of what's per value created or energy per value created, and that is creating value in this world, even though obviously energy consumption is something that is significant. And then to close on what Petri basically alluded to, yes, I mean, I'm a co-PI in the Open Euro initiative, which is the largest open source initiative in language models in Europe ever. It's not unproblematic, and I think that's what we need to solve in the coming years. How do we actually collaborate around these large-scale research projects and bring together many organizations and drive these public infrastructure initiatives that are seen as moonshots, where you really get the compute, get the capital to do something that is competitive.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. More courage in being more open, I think, is one of the takeaways for me. Thank you for this full room. I really appreciate all of your time and your questions. And a big round of applause for a wonderful panel.